record so that we have a record of this. All right. So just a little bit about who we are. If you're not sure, we are a free legal service for young people under the age of 25. We are a statewide service, so we are able to help and assist young people all around Victoria. If a young person or if a young person who you're supporting is not sure about whether it's a legal issue that they need help with, we're always happy to kind of listen and read through what that query is and work out whether it is something that we can help you out with. And if it's not something that we can help you, we'll try to point you into the right direction. Please also feel free to use that chat to ask any questions that you might have along the way. If we don't have time to answer it in this hour session, I'll take those questions away and answer it, and again, send it out in the email so that you all have the answers to that. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. So also wanting to get to know you as well. So please put in the chat a song, book, or TV show that you're really enjoying at the moment. It's great to know what people are up to. Personally, I'm always stuck on what to read, what to watch after I finish this series. So it'll be great to get any recommendations that you have. What I'm reading at the moment is the Dictionary of Lost Words, and just started that, so it's going pretty okay so far. But yeah, it's good to get recommendations from other people, what they're reading, watching, or listening to. Just a run through of today's plan, we'll be talking about respectful relationships, so Tamika will have a chat to us about that. I'll then go through consent laws and the new affirmative consent laws that will be coming into effect on the 30th of June, and then also having a chat about sexting laws. There'll be also a few changes that will come into effect in June as well. So I might pass it on now to Tamika to run us through the first part of the presentation. Thanks, Tamika.
Cool. Thanks, Lisa. So hi, everyone. My name's Tamika. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a sexual health promotion officer and educator at Ballarat Community Health. Here in Ballarat, we're on the land of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation. So yeah, part of my role is working with young people in schools, as well as alternative education settings, and also residential care services as well, around sexual and reproductive health, and also positive relationships and consent. So I guess historically, when we've been teaching young people around consent, many people have always gone straight to the laws and what constitutes of sexual assault, which is really, really important information, especially now with, the new affirmative consent laws that are coming in, which is amazing. But I found also it's not all the information that a young person needs to be able to navigate positive sexual experiences and have respectful relationships. Because consent, it's not just a legal issue, but it is a human issue and society issue as well. As in reality, I guess consent is not black and white or simple, unfortunately. There seems to be like a lot of grey areas in between. When educating young people about consent, we need to show them that consent is more than just saying yes and working out what they may get in trouble for or what they can get away with. I will point out here though, because I know we have a lot of lawyers in the room, I'll point out here that I understand that although that's not the intent when educating young people about the law and sexual assault, sometimes it does end up being one of the key takeaway messages is, okay, well, this is what I can get away with and this is what I can't get away with. When really we should be teaching them more about values of consent and what we call ethical consent. Also, there's been recent, oh, hang on, haven't got that far yet. There's been a recent national research into young people's knowledge, attitudes, and behaviours into sexual health and relationships education. And it's identified that there are high gaps in education when we're talking about consent and positive relationships, as young people are wanting more in-depth discussion about what consent is, with real-life examples, how to ask for it, how to be assertive, and communicate their boundaries, but also, just as importantly, how to respond if someone says no, how to get to know someone, and also how to break up with someone or how to end a relationship as well. So if we go to the next slide, please. At Ballarat Community Health, we've found that the best practice is really comprehensive relationships and sexuality education must be delivered using what we call, gone too far, a sex positive approach. So when we say a sex positive approach, it doesn't mean encouraging all young people to go out, have lots of sex. It's really about reducing shame and stigma or taboo about having the open discussions around sex, relationships, consent, and that it is okay to talk about it. It is part of society, it's part of human nature, and there's nothing that we should be feeling shame or stigma when it comes to sex and relationships. By having open discussions, it allows young people to really start critically thinking about consent, relationships, having those trusting conversations. We talk about sexuality, power, justice, encouraging help-seeking behaviour if they need it, being able to negotiate risk, whether that's about safe sex practices or about things or types of sex that they like to have, and also, just as importantly, pursuing pleasure. So as I mentioned before, at Ballarat Community Health, I generally work with young people in schools, so about at that year 9, year 10 age, as well as alternative education and residential care services. So we have open discussions about like what is consent, and encouraging young people to be assertive in communicating what they like, their dislikes, being able to set their boundaries. We do touch on the law because that is really, really important. However, I find it's great in scenarios where we can do this presentation with someone from like Youthlaw or someone from VicPol or someone from CARSA who can also come from that legal or sexual assault angles as well. So it's really that collective approach. And then we also introduced the ethical consent framework from a practical guide to love, sex and relationships, which is actually a free Australian curriculum that I can send the link out to. The ethical consent framework embraces that most people are, or they want to be, respectful and ethical people. So, you know, that whole treat others the way you want to be treated is what we are all taught from such a young age. Being respectful and ethical means having our own values and understanding those values, trying to do the right thing, being compassionate with empathy, fairness and equality. And then finally, to really answer that age-old question of what is good sex and how do we have it, next slide please, is really having that conversation that good sex is sex that is consenting and respectful. It's based on good communication. It is unique to everyone, aims for mutual pleasure, and is practiced in a safe and healthy way. And that is it for my presentation. I do have all of the resources that I can pop into the chat, and the national research that I mentioned earlier, because I did see come up in the chat that someone was interested in that. I will send all that through. Also, there is consent education for primary school age children as well. I can send that through if anyone is interested, but I thought just for this target audience, it might be better situated for 12 to 25s. But in primary schools, we do talk about consent, not so much in a sexual way, but more about those protective behaviours. So, you know, having body autonomy, knowing your network of helping hand and who you can talk to if need to, and also just knowing the differences between having a secret or something that makes us feel bad, and surprises. So something that makes us feel good. So yeah, consent really should be taught or started from such an early age, and each year build upon, throughout a young person's life. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Tamika. So helpful and really useful. I think I'm just going to see if I can help out some people getting into this webinar. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a second and see if I can get that sorted. So just bear with me for a second. And
no worries, I'll just read through the questions in case there's any for me.
Thank
and
you.
Also, I am currently watching the TV show Jury Duty. Has anyone seen that? It is so good.
Where can you watch it on?
It's on Amazon Prime.
Ah.
And it's like a bunch of comedians and this one guy who doesn't know that it's all pretend. And yeah, it's really good. I highly recommend it.
Sorry, I'm just going to reply. Okay. Yeah, I just saw Ree's comment asking for an SBS. I think that's Jess Hill's documentary, right? Yeah, it looks really good. Yeah, definitely checking it out. Yeah, but I think you also probably need time and space to watch it. It's pretty tricky topics that, I think very obvious that it goes through. All right, well, thanks for bearing with me, everybody. I will now share the screen again. We'll go through the rest of the slides. All right, so if you have any questions, please, feel free to put them in the chat. If we don't get time today, again, I'll record all the questions and send out an email with the answers. Okay, so we'll move on now to the consent topic. What we'll go through in the next few slides will be going through what does consent mean, circumstances where there's no consent or consent vitiating factors. There's also a new requirement for an affirmative consent. Now, what does that mean? And we'll go through image-based sexual offences or sexting. And like I mentioned before, I think I said 30th of June, it's 30th July is when the law is changing. The laws have been passed, it just won't come into effect until 30th of July. When we talk about consent and in that context of sexual offences and offending, this question around age of consent also comes up. Just wanted to be clear that there will be no changes to the age of consent laws. So what it is at the moment is what it will be past 30th of July. People may or may not know this, but I'll go through broadly and just briefly what the age of consent laws are and what it means. So the age of consent laws, it means when the law considers a person to be when they're able to legally consent, depending on what age they are. So the first group of people under 12, the law says that they can't consent. So any sexual acts done with a person under 12 is illegal. The next group up between the ages of 12 to 15, they are able to consent with another person, but that other person has to be within 24 months of that person's age. This is a very strict rule where the police will be looking at the birth dates of the parties involved and working out exactly how many months is between those two, the parties' ages. The next group up is anyone aged between 16 and 17. They can consent to engage in sexual activity or sexual acts with anyone. The only exceptional rule is that that person can't be in a position of care or supervision. So very common examples of people who fall within that category would be teachers, mentors, coaches. that's the law at the moment. And when I have a chat about this to different groups, there's always discussions around, even though this is the law, it's a different thing altogether when we're talking about a 16-year-old and engaging in a relationship with, a 50-year-old. Like, the law says that might be okay if that person's not in a position of care or supervision, but then there's other questions that come around whether that's appropriate, whether there's that position of authority that, or other form of power that's being misused or abused. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. When we talk about consent in the legal sense, it becomes a legal issue when it forms a sexual offence. So there are a few offences up on the screen there when it might become a legal issue. So where it involves a sexual offence, where it involves rape, or if a person's involved in an offence. That's when someone encourages or helps another person to commit either of the two above offences. If they are deemed to have encouraged or helped, then they would be charged with the same offences as the person who did commit the offence. And that's why. So what does consent mean? So in the law, consent means it's written and defined as free and voluntary agreement. What does that mean? We'll go through what that actually means in the next few slides. The law also now says that a person doesn't consent just because they don't resist to the act or because of their previous sexual behaviour or history. Consent is ongoing, and most importantly, it can be withdrawn at any time. So you're not committed to completing that sexual act or engaging in that sexual activity. And if you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, then it can be taken away at any time. I think I'll just pause here and just wanted to make it clear and known to the group today that if we are talking about something that is really tricky to you, or it's really hard to kind of sit through, please feel free to take a break, come back when you feel comfortable, or if not, that's okay as well. I'll also share in the chat a list of really useful numbers and contacts and supports if you do need to reach out to any of those organisations. And if you would like to debrief, I'll share my contact details at the end, and there'll be opportunity to debrief if that's needed. So the law also goes through situations where there cannot be consent. So these are something that's called consent vitiating factors. So the list here is what it is at the moment. So the first is if a person doesn't say or do anything as a sign of consent, then there's no consent. If there's force or fear of force or harm, including physical, psychological, or financial, if they're held against their will, if they're asleep, unconscious, or affected by alcohol or drugs, if they don't understand that it's a sexual act, or if they're mistaken about the act or the identity of the person, then the law automatically deems that circumstance or situation to be no consent given. The next slide will go through new circumstances that will apply from the 30th of July. So if the situation arose because of coercion or intimidation, and this is to potentially cover off on family violence situations, if there is an abuse of relationship of authority or trust, and this covers situations where there might be that imbalance of power between victim, survivor, and perpetrator. I think what they're trying to capture here is relationships such as employees and employers, that relationship. If there was false or misleading representation about payment of commercial sexual services, so an example there would be if a person agreed to engage in sexual activity with another on the premise that they would get paid. If they don't get paid, then there's no consent in that situation. And stealthing is another new circumstance, which is where there's an agreement that a condom will be used, but then it's either taken off or not used in the first place. Then consent is to be deemed to not have been given. Also, when something comes up with the chat, I get a notification so I can see if you have questions. And yeah, if it's relevant to like what we're talking about, I'm happy to answer it as well. So I think we've got a question about what counts as being misled about the identity of a person. So yeah, a question, I mean, an example would be if you're, if a person's in a room and they're engaging in sexual activity with one person and they leave the room and a different person comes back, that's not the same person. So that's a mistaken of identity of a person. That's a common one. That's a really interesting scenario there, where there's an ICLer who is 50 having sex with a 16-year-old who was a client. Yeah, it's quite, I don't have the exact answer, so I might need to take that away, Katrina. That's a really good scenario and question there. Yeah, I'll take that away, I'll have a think, and then I'll put an answer back. Okay, so we'll move on to affirmative consent. So this is a new method of how a person's able to give consent. So what does affirmative consent mean? It means a person has to take reasonable steps. And what does reasonable steps mean? It means a person has to say or do something to find out if there is consent, and has to be within a reasonable time with every act. A reasonable time is at the time of the act or just before the act takes place. And by, oh yeah, and again, I think every act is self-explanatory. So you might consent to kissing, but then not consent to penetration. So it has to happen at every act. The greater focus is now on the accused person's actions rather than on the victim survivor's actions or their behaviors. So it's a greater focus on what did the person do to actually find out that the person was consenting. So just a quick summary of what we've gone through. Consent, it means in the law, free and voluntary agreement. There's a range of circumstances where the law automatically says a person's not consenting. So that's the two slides with the list of situations where a person's is deemed to have not consented. For affirmative consent to have been taken place, a person has to have taken active steps, which means they have to say or do something to find out if the other person is consenting. And really importantly, sexual assault's never the fault or responsibility of the victim survivor. There's lots of support services out there, and in that, the bundle of information that I'll be sending out, I'll have a little kind of fact sheet on how you can support or be supported as a victim survivor. So we'll go on to a quick quiz. I think we've got time. So I'll share this in the chat, but I just do need to stop sharing the screen for a second to be able to pop up the quiz. But yeah, if you had like a couple of minutes to be able to take that down, if you can, but if not, please don't stress because I'll send it in the chat, and then we'll get started with the quiz. Oh, I don't think I sent that to everybody. Let me just send that to everybody now. Okay. While I get that quiz up, great question, Melanie. So there is still that need or that requirement for the accused to reasonably believe that the victim was consenting. For reasonable belief to have been met, the person has to have taken active steps. So that's where the affirmative consent comes into play. For there to be reasonable belief, they have to have taken those steps that the victim was consenting. All right. So hopefully everybody's got the details of the quiz. So I'll get that started. fingers crossed this works. If not, I'll go through the traditional slideshow with the Q&As. All right, so question 1. Matt is 16 years old and they are at a party. They can see Ashley from the year level on the couch across the room, who's looking to be extremely drunk and struggling to sit. Up straight, John is in the year above them, sitting next to Ashley and touching them in a sexual manner. Nick and Simon are standing next to John, watching and laughing. Matt doesn't like it, so they leave the room and go elsewhere. Has a sexual offence been committed and by whom? All right, let's see if we've got players. Great. Okay, it looks like people were able to get that on really easy. That's great. All right, so we'll start the quiz. Don't stress too much about this part. You'll also get to read the question on your phone or your device. Yeah. Okay, really interesting responses. So yeah, it's very, I think I put in a lot of names to probably confuse people. But the reason why C is the right answer is because when we look at that scenario, it was, I think, hopefully obvious that John was the perpetrator of that sexual assault. Simon and Nick were there encouraging and laughing, and so they would also be charged through that acting in, or previously it's called acting concert, but you know, assisting the person to commit the offence. Matt wouldn't be charged or be criminally charged because they weren't part of that encouraging or laughing. Even though they were there witnessing it, they wouldn't be charged. And I always get kind of like discussions flowing from this that, why shouldn't Matt also be charged, because they were there and not stopping what was happening. But the law doesn't cover off on bystanders kind of witnessing offences to be then responsible as well. Yeah, so hopefully that makes it clear, but if not, please feel free to let me know in the chat and I can explain a bit further. We'll go on to the next question. Question 2. So Lucy's 15, their partner Sam's 17. They've been dating for over a year now. They've been engaging in sexual activity together. Both Lucy and Sam have been very careful to make sure that the other is consenting to the sexual activity on every occasion. The relationship is going well. Lucy's birthday is in December and Sam's birthday is next month in June. Has the sexual offence been committed and by whom? So again, it's wordy, lots of maths, but hopefully not too tricky. Oh, excellent. We've got a few more players. That's great. All right, again, a mix of answers, which is good because it prompts discussion. So yeah, again, it was a bit worded, a bit wordy, and lots of different numbers, and having to do the maths about birthdays and when they'll be what age. So the reason why C is the correct answer is because if we go back, Lucy is 15, Sam's 17. So at the moment, they would fall within that 24-month rule, only if their birthdays were on the exact same day, because that's 2 years exactly apart. But because Lucy's birthday is in December and Sam's birthday is next month in June, Sam will be 18 when Lucy's still 15. So that's why it would fall, that's why it would fall outside that 24-month rule. And I mean, realistically, if they were having that committed sexual, if they were having that relationship and it was consensual on every occasion, it probably won't be reported to police. And that's, yeah, and I can see why people might have chosen A, that there was no sexual offense committed. But technically and strictly under the law, there has. And only Sam would be committed. Only Sam would be found to have committed the sexual offense. So it will always be the older person who would be responsible. Question 3. Abdul's 22 and his boyfriend Christian 17. They've been engaging in consensual sexual activity together. Has a sexual offense been committed and by whom? Oh, that's really quick. That's great. Okay, let's see. Okay, great. Again, I think with the ages, it's probably a little bit, tricky. But A is correct because because Abdul is 22 and Christian is 17. They fall outside that, or with that age of consent laws, they fall within that last bracket, which is 16 and 17, can engage with anyone except a person who's in a position of care or supervision. So that's why A is the correct answer. I think some people also might see that as Abdul committing a sexual offense because of his age, because he's 22 and Christian is 17. So it's quite common to be able to to answer that answer. So last question, Morgan and Alex are partners. They're both 16. They're at Morgan's house one night and Alex keeps trying to initiate sexual activity. Morgan doesn't want to and keeps pushing Alex's hand away, but is afraid to tell him to stop. Alex keeps trying and pressures Morgan. Eventually Morgan freezes and lets Alex continue. Has a sexual offense been committed? Oh, sorry. Let me just go to that. Wait for the players. Great. Great. So I can see the majority has said yes. So that's really good. Hopefully that example had a few. Well, that question had a few examples of when Morgan might not have consented, even though Morgan might not have said no. There were different behaviours that they were exhibiting that would fall within not being able to consent or not consenting. So pushing away, not engaging, not initiating or not following on Alex's behaviour or actions. That means that they weren't consenting. And I think hopefully a clear example was that freezing. So if a person doesn't say or do anything to consent, then they're not consenting. All right, so let's see who was the fastest and who may have won. Very close. It's hard to tell. Oh, Joanna, congratulations. Fastest answers. All right, so I'll just stop sharing so I can go back to the PowerPoint. All right, there we go. All right. So any questions around that first kind of section that we talked about, affirmative consent, age of consent? If there are, please feel free again to utilize the chat. All right, so we'll move on to sexting. So sexting or image-based sexual abuse, it involves the non-consensual creation and or sharing of intimate images and or threats to do so. So we'll go through what all that means. So what's new? From the 30th of July, there'll be 3 new offences. Producing, that's a very new offence, which is making an intimate image. Distributing and threaten to distribute aren't new offences, but those offences will look a little bit different. The offences will also move away from the part of the law that's considered not to be as serious, so in the Summary Offences Act, to a more serious part of the law, which is the Crimes Act. And the penalty, the maximum penalty, is also increasing from 2 years to 3 years. When we talk about penalties, though, it's a range. So the court looks at the penalty or the maximum penalty as what they can give on the maximum as a maximum penalty. So on the one end of the spectrum, but there's a whole range of other sentencing options that the court has available. So it really depends on what the person's been charged with, what their past history is, who they are as a person will determine what appropriate sentence is given. So yeah, when I put down the maximum penalty, it's not the penalty that will always be given in court, it's the maximum that they can give. There's also a few new things that will come from the 30th of July. So the definition or the meaning of intimate image will change, and it's changed to better cover persons of diverse genders. And I'll go through what that new definition will look like. The courts will also have the new power to destroy or get rid of intimate images. And there is going to be a new rule for anyone under 16, if they are going to be charged, then the Director of Public Prosecutions need to agree to having those charges laid against a person under 16. So there's an added layer to hopefully protect young people from being charged under these new offences. So what does an intimate image mean? It means an image that shows a person engaging in sexual activity or in a manner or context that's sexual, or the genital or anal region of a person, or if a person is female, transgender, intersex person identifying as female, the breasts of that person. So previously it just stated if a person was female, the breasts of that person, but the definition is now hopefully a little bit more inclusive to include transgender, intersex persons identifying as female. So this new offence of producing or creating intimate image, it's illegal now to create an intimate image of someone without their consent. An important note to make is that anyone who's under 18 or a child cannot consent to having their image being made. The maximum penalty for this, again, is 3 years. There is an exception. If you are an adult, so someone who's over 18, you can consent to having your intimate image created, but you need to have consent. You need to consent or provide consent on how that image was created or how that image is going to be created. So that's important to note. It's an offence to distribute an intimate image. This is not a new offence. It's just tweaked a little bit differently because of the different exceptions. So it's illegal to send or share an intimate image of someone or threat to do that. I'll go into that in the next few slides. And people under 18 can't consent to having their picture shared. So the first exception is if you are over 18 as an adult, you can consent to having your intimate image shared, but you also need to consent on how that image is to be shared. So you can say, I'm happy for you to share it over Instagram, but I don't want you to share it over Facebook, or share it with person A, but not with person B, C, D, or with anyone else besides person A. The second exception is if an image is in the public space. So if the person in that image is over 18 and that image is in a public space, for example, a website, and the person in that image or a reasonable person consented to that previous sharing, and it's also believable that that adult would consent to having that image shared, then that's an exception to being able to share that intimate image. It's a lot of words. I don't know if I explained that well. If not, please let me know and I'll try to do it again. But essentially, it's if an image is in the public space, you are able to share that with other people if that person in the image consented to that happening, or if a reasonable person believes that they would consent to that being shared, and also have consented to that to be shared in the first place. So I think what the law's trying to capture here is those revenge porn websites, where people have posted intimate images of people on that website, and they may have tried to use that as a defense to say that it's already in the public space, I can just share it. So this exception won't apply because the person whose photos on that website didn't consent to being on that website in the first place. So that's why it's not in that public space to be able to be shared around. And finally, it is an offence to threaten to distribute an intimate image. Even if you don't go through with that threat, it's enough for the person who you made that threat to have believed you would share that around for the offence to be made out. That's a really great question, Mel. I think I'll take that away if that's okay, and again answer it. Yeah, thanks, Nancy. All right. So yeah, we're making really great time. We've just got a final true or false kind of section. And it's tricky because I can't see everybody, but I'll see if I can bring up the participants. And maybe if you able to like put your thumbs up or hands up or something to say if it's true, then that's how we can kind of work that out. All right, true or false? Charlie is in year 9. They send a pic of themselves in bed naked to Tom. They said, share the love with your mates if you like. Tom goes ahead and shares it with some of their friends. It's okay because Charlie gave consent. So what do you think, true or false? Okay, I'm sorry, I may not have been able to, yeah, great, thanks. Enabled people to, yeah, exactly, so false. That's exactly right. The reason why it's false is because Charlie's in year 9, so we can safely assume that they're under 18. And when you're under 18, you can't consent to having your intimate image shared. All right, true or false? Eli texts Leo, I'm over it, don't want to go out with you anymore. Leo texts back, take that back or you'll be sorry. Remember those secret pics? I can easily send them to everyone. What Leo is saying is illegal, even if they don't go through with it. What do you think, true or false? Yeah, great, true. Yeah, perfect. And I think hopefully the threat to share an intimate image was hopefully clear enough to say that even if a person doesn't go through with it, it's still an offense if you threaten to share that. True or false? Carrie finds a naked photo of a person. Oh, sorry. Oh, I just gave me up. Hello Magazine and replace their face with the face of James, who works with Carrie. They send it around to their workmates. As a joke, it's okay for Carrie to do this. Yeah, it's false. And that's to cover off on that new offense, of creating an intimate image without a person's consent. And that's hopefully going to target those deep fake porn where people are changing the face or the body of people to replace it with other people's faces. Technology is moving very fast and it's very interesting. Okay, that's it. That's the end of our presentation. So thank you all for participating and joining. It's been really great. And yeah, I'll share our contact details. I'll stop sharing now though. In the chat so that you have all that in the meantime. And then I'll also send out a link to this to this recording so that, let me see if I can. Hopefully that was sent through. Yeah, great. But we do have some time to go through some questions. So let me see if I can allow everybody to be able to put up your hands and ask without me having to unmute everyone. So let's see if I can do that. Oh, okay. Oops. I'm going to have to do that too. Oops. Okay. Don't know if am I doing this right. Good point, Mel. Okay. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or I think that might be everybody I've allowed people to, unmute themselves and ask questions or, put them in the chat if you would like. Yeah, I agree. It's definitely really cool, but depends on how it works. Okay, great question, Lynn. So you're not obliged to find out whether the person in the image is consenting. If you do, if you do know that person, then you can ask for that person's consent. But it's also based on that reasonable person's perspective. So if a reasonable person would believe that the person had consented to having that picture shared, then that's enough. But if a reasonable person wouldn't believe that their image was to be shared, then consent, wasn't given and they can't fall within that exception. Very happy to, to share this recording. In the email that I send out. So feel free to share that with your colleagues. Let's see if I find any other questions. Oh, okay, Lauren. Is it legal for someone under 18 to share a sexual image of themselves to someone they're in a relationship? Great question. So I do also cover off on child abuse material, and this is probably where this exception will fall under. So it is legal for someone who's under 18 to share an intimate image of themselves with another person. Big exception is that the other person who they're sending it to has to be within 24 months of that person's age. So that there's that exception. Another kind of preface is that that exception or defense only applies in Victoria. So there are federal laws that are stronger or take precedent over Victorian laws, and that will, unfortunately, there's no exception under federal law, but in Victorian law there is that exception. Cool. And let's see if I can find any. Oh, I think, Lena, hopefully we've answered that question about if the image was in that public space, if you're obliged to find out if that person's consenting. Okay, I think we've got time, Mel, to, if you're not, I'm not sure if Mel, you maybe still on here.
I'm still here, sorry.
Cool. I think we've got time to answer your question. So in terms of the expanded definition of intimate images and the new offences, how does this play out with the images on a website platform that are outside Victorian? So if the offence happened within Victoria, though, then the person can, the person can still take action. So example is like if if you're posting an image of yourself on a website that's like an international website, and then that image is then, I don't know what that technology word is, where like you change, you take out your photo and put it for like another person's photo. then you would fall with, then you can then report that to police, because then that falls within creating an intimate image without your consent. Or maybe Mel, if you wanted to like give me.
No, it's probably, honestly, sorry.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It's
No,
the most difficult question, but
Yeah.
just so often, you know, once an image is out, it ends up on all of these sites where that's sort of outside of, you know, like it's on an international website or it's somewhere, regardless of the original intention of it. So yeah, that's all. It was a wondering, and honestly, probably way too difficult question.
No, not at all. I think
no,
please don't be. And I think it's very common, especially with technology, being so widely used. And so it's again really great, but also only if you use in hopefully the right manner. But if the victim survivor is in Victoria, then there's ways in which they can get support for what's happened to their image. It might not fall, neatly within one of those offences that we talked about today, but it could fall within other offences. So if there are any scenarios like that where it's, nothing ever, fits perfectly within the different offences, but if you think it touches on any of the things that we talked about and you wanted to chat it further through, then that's something that, Youthlaw is very happy to do that. I'm happy to do that. To work out what supports there are and what we can do to support, the person's going through that.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks. I think we've gone through that. Oh, okay. So I think Katrina, your question about that scenario with the client and the 50-year-old ICE dealer, really great question. I'm gonna have to have time to ponder on how to answer that. So I might need time to do that. Potentially, depending on what happened, Melanie. I think the nature and what the alleged kind of offending is will determine which authorities will come into play. Potentially the AFP, but also international Interpol. It depends on, I guess, the severity and the seriousness of what's happening. Okay, well, thanks everyone for attending. That was really great. All the really good questions. I'll send out the resources via the email. And if you have any questions, please, feel free to get in touch and hopefully we can answer it at a later time. All right. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Tamika.
Thank you.
See you guys. Bye.
Okay.